some stereotypes or stigmas that you know about PWDs?
I think a big stereotype or stigma that I see a lot is that we need to treat people with disabilities differently. Whether that is kind of talking to them like they can't understand us, or acting like their bodies and their disabilities are our business, or something that we can manipulate or talk about. I think that a lot of times people just assume that the person with a disability wants to talk about their disability all the time, and or does not want to talk about it at all. And so I think a lot of the stigma that we see is based on just not understanding that they can communicate, or how they communicate, and not giving them the same credit that we give people with able bodies, of like, let's have a conversation about it, instead of feeling like we know everything or feeling like we know nothing.
What is the most harmful stereotype or stigma?
You know, it really depends. So in my mind, I kind of think of two sets of people, and this is oversimplifying it quite a bit, but there are people who have disabilities that you can't see. So I used to work a lot with people with autism, and I think that is tough for them and for their caregivers as they're growing up, because this kid who's having a meltdown in the store might look like a typically developing kid, and so people think they know how this child should be acting, and they think that they're acting in the wrong way, and really they don't understand that this child's brain is different, that this child's, you know, whole experience of the world is completely different, or can be completely different, in terms of what they're feeling and what they're attaching to in the environment, and that, you know, what looks like a tantrum or something they're mad or upset about, it could be just their body overreacting. And so I think that the people with kind of quote unquote invisible disabilities oftentimes get judged as neurotypical, get judged as, you should know all the rules, you should follow all the rules, and it should be easy for you to do, even though our world is built around a neurotypical brain, not a brain with autism or with, you know, other disabilities. And so it makes it really challenging for people with these disabilities, even though they look like they fit in, to actually feel like they belong or fit in. For people with very obvious differences and difficulties, I think the biggest stigma is probably assumptions about their competence. So one of the things that I really hold tightly to in my practice is what we call the least dangerous assumption. And so it's basically, if we assume someone with a disability can't do it, then we won't teach them, we won't expect them to do it, we won't set them up for success, we'll just let them languish, basically. And that's dangerous. So having low expectations or no expectations for someone is a really dangerous proposition in terms of helping them fulfill their life potential, helping them be included in society, helping them, you know, just express their emotions and personality and their thoughts and feelings. So one of the things we talk a lot about is either presuming competence or presuming potential. So when a child especially comes in the door, and parents say, well, they can't do this, they can't do that, and they can't do that, I often try to reframe it as, well, they don't do it yet, or they don't do it in the way we expect, or we're going to teach them how to do it instead of can't, presuming that these are skills that they're going to be able to learn and grow and build and use, instead of skills that they just can't do. Same thing with adults. I have so many of my adults who say that people come up to them and talk to them like they're a child, or touch their bodies or pet them in ways that are just very demeaning. And that's, you know, that's a human being in there. That would be like if someone came up to you or I and started being like, oh, sweetie, how was your day? and how we would react would not be good. And if you don't have a body that reacts in the way that people are expecting, or doesn't react in the way that you want it to, like you can't say like, lady, what are you doing? Get out of my face. Then it kind of perpetuates this ongoing cycle of stigma, and it can be really harmful.
What do you believe are the best ways to act around PWDs?
I really think that there's no one best way to act. I think that, well, maybe that's wrong. I think the best way to act is with empathy and kindness, but I think that's true for anyone you encounter in your life. So I think what has worked for me the best is continuing to have an ongoing conversation about things that maybe we would take for granted for people without disabilities. So how do you best communicate? What are your emotions that are going on right now? Do you need help or do you not need help? So those sorts of things are really important. For me as a speech pathologist, a lot of it comes down to communication. So like when we were speaking to the gentleman in the lobby, asking him, do you want me to predict what you're saying if I kind of see what you're spelling and I think I can get it, or do you want me to let you spell it out the whole way? Do you want me to ask you yes or no questions because that's faster and easier, or do you want me to ask you open-ended questions even though that's a little bit harder for you to respond to? Do you want me to, if I see something on your body, like I have one gentleman with a trach, and he has kind of a towel that he wears here, and sometimes the towel comes up and covers the trach, and it's very hard for him to breathe, and it's very hard for him to communicate that. And so we kind of have this understanding that I had asked him, like, if I see that covering your trach, is it okay for me to just adjust it? And he was like, yes. And so having those conversations about their bodies, our bodies, communication can be really powerful. And just being open and curious in a way that isn't invasive, right? Like, just because they look different than us, just because they're using their bodies in a different way than us, that doesn't mean that it's open season for questions and things like that. But we also don't want to go the opposite extreme of pretending like nothing's happening or pretending like they're exactly like that us, because they do have differences, just like everybody does. They're just more explicit with someone with a disability.
Why did you specifically choose this work?
That's a good question. I think that for me, language has always been really interesting, language and communication. And I didn't really know too much about this field until one of my friends had a child with severe autism, and she started talking about how they had a speech therapist who helped them have a relationship. So her son was nonverbal and communicated using his body and other things instead of his voice. And the speech therapist both helped him communicate to her in a way that she understood, but also helped mom interpret how he was communicating to her already. And this mom just said, yeah, I wouldn't have had a relationship with my son if it weren't for this speech therapist, because I didn't understand how he was communicating to me, and being able to understand that and help shape how he's communicating so he can communicate with more people, with his peers, with other adults, that sort of thing. That's really changed our lives. And I was like, well, that sounds very interesting. So I think that was kind of the kernel of what it is for me, is not only helping the people with disabilities communicate in a way that more people understand, but also helping people who have people with disabilities in their life, especially loved ones, understand that the differences don't have to be defining of who they are, and that everyone who is human has a right to communicate and is trying to communicate, and so we can respect all sorts of different forms of communication.
If you could tell us one thing about PWDs, what is the most important thing to know?
That's a really good question too. I think that I think that it's hard for me as a person without a visible disability to say what's the most important thing. So oftentimes I go and ask people with disabilities or look at what people with disabilities are doing in the world to try to kind of raise awareness and teach people how to interact with those with disabilities. So one of my favorites right now is a man out of Portland. His name is Kevin, and he has a website called Crippled Wisdom. He has cerebral palsy. He's an adult with cerebral palsy. And one of the things that he says a lot is we can teach about people with disability, we can teach about empathy, but until you actually feel it, until you actually experience it, it's very hard to change your behaviors. So one of the things that he is doing is he's distributing temporary tattoos, and what he instructs people to do is to wear it on their face. So it's very visible, it's very prominent, everybody can see it, and he said that's the closest that he's seen for someone with an able body to experience what it feels like to be someone with a disability, who gets stared at, who gets laughed at, who gets unsolicited questions, who gets treated differently because of something that's visible on their body. And it's really powerful because he's had people who he's given this challenge to, and they say, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's too much. And he's like, well, this is me every day. This is when I walk out the door. I don't have the choice. Another thing that I've done is go out and communicate in society with a communication device or non-verbally, and kind of experience how that feels every day. And it's scary. It's really scary. Even for me, someone who feels very comfortable with these, going up to the Dick's counter and ordering a hamburger with a communication device is a very different experience than going up and just asking for one. And so I try to continue to do those sorts of things, to just really try to feel and know some small glimpse of what it might be like to do this every single day.
Great. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
answering
you're
my
welcome.
questions.